Hi everyone, and welcome to the week on the management of compensation in the South African Public Service. Compensation management reflects the most basic dimension of any employment relationship, and that is its economic dimension. In reflecting on what we've already done in this week, we may remember that compensation it can be defined as the financial and non-financial extrinsic rewards that are provided by an employer for the time, skill, and effort that is made available by the employee in fulfilling the job requirements aimed at achieving institutional objectives. That compensation may be divided into both intrinsic as well as extrinsic rewards. Intrinsic rewards reflect more responsibilities, opportunities for personal growth, autonomy in your work, challenging and interesting work, whereas extrinsic rewards reflect more financial and non-financial rewards, as you have learned throughout the week. The compensation objectives also speak about the ability of the compensation system to attract and retain suitable employees, to manage equity among employees, to reward good performance, to maintain cost effectiveness, and to comply with the legal requirements. We've also looked at the different compensation systems, being time-based systems, person-based systems, and performance-based systems. In the following presentation, we are specifically going to be looking at what performance-based systems look like and what is needed for them to work in the public sector. One may ask, when looking at paying for performance, why is it important to link pay to performance? Well, it is typically introduced as part of a compensation plan to increase an institution's competitiveness in the labor market, to stimulate individual, team, and institutional performance, to encourage employee identification with the institution's objectives, and to control fixed compensation costs by putting a portion of pay at risk if certain agreed objectives are not achieved. However, there are particular problems with paying for performance, and they are the lack of objectivity or quantifiable performance measures for many jobs, and the resulting reliance on subjective performance ratings. The poorly perceived link between performance and pay, which usually is due to the system ignoring the principle of immediate reinforcement by linking performance to the reward only at the end of the year. The failure to relate aspects of performance that are rewarded to the overall strategic performance objectives, so encouraging wrong kind of behavior actually. Like for instance, a production bonus scheme that rewards according to levels of output rather than the quality of the output. Inadequate communication about the objectives, the procedures, and the benefits of the pay scheme, and the level of performance-based portion of pay not being perceived as being proportionate to the efforts that are required. Sometimes you may also find that labor unions oppose pay for performance. Although there are certainly not a single list that any organization can follow to ensure that incentives are appropriately used, there are some successful incentive schemes that make use of generally or accepted guiding principles that are relevant to all. The first being that an organization needs to establish a pay-for-performance work culture. This is where the effectiveness of the compensation system is linked to the extent to which such a system can appropriately match the institutional context. Secondly, you need to look at two important considerations in creating an appropriate performance-orientated work culture, meaning you need to look at the measuring of performance and then at establishing the determinants for this performance. In the second place, you need to ensure employee acceptance. So in other words, that means that labor unions on behalf of employees need to accept the incentive schemes that are proposed by the employer. And that means, thirdly, to ensure that there is a clear line of sight, which refers to the degree to which employees can see a clear connection between their behavior and the payout from an incentive system. Setting high but attainable standards of performance means that performance targets should be attainable but not easily attainable. So in other words, it should have a level of challenge that is important for the intrinsic reward for an employee. Clearly establish defined and accepted performance standards or output standards that can be based on objective, preferably quantifiable measures that should be agreed upon between the individual, the group, and then the manager, to ensure a simple and understandable design, which means that the incentive scheme should be sufficiently simple to enable all employees to understand its operation and so that they can easily calculate their own rewards. Also provide for flexibility and review whether the performance factors that determine the level of payments are still reflect the institutional's operational realities, and whether the scheme is losing motivational value due to employees taking the incentives payments for granted. Lastly, whether the scheme needs recommunicating and repackaging to revitalize interest and to improve performance. One needs an effective administration system to support the incentive scheme, and the efficiency of the administrative support structures and procedures are vital to ensure appropriate administrative issues, such as effective ongoing communication, procedures for addressing questions and complaints that relate to the fairness with which incentives were given to some employees and to others not. We are able to differentiate between different types of incentive schemes. They are the individual schemes and the group or organizational schemes. Under individual schemes, we find two types, namely production and management incentives. Production incentives speak about piece rate plans, and this is usually where individual pay is directly linked to a number of units that are produced. For instance, a number of houses that can be linked to the receiving of a particular bonus. Standard hour systems are similar to piece rate plans, with the exception that productivity standards are not measured in terms of output, but is set in terms of the time that is needed to complete a particular task. And then we have individual bonuses, which is the one that is most often used within the public sector, and this is regarded as a once-off reward for high performance. Management bonuses relate to the bonus that is, or relate to the performance rather, of the management, the person in management, and his or her ability to realize organizational goals and objectives. Deferred compensation speak about issues such as accessibility to pension schemes and maybe provident funds, and then also supplementary benefits that can speak to, for instance, entertainment allowances or transport costs, etc. Then we have group or organizational schemes, and these can also be bonuses based on group performance. You may want to think about examples such as Premier Excellence Awards that are often given to groups of persons within an organization who've performed exceptionally well in a period of time. Suggestion systems can also be used as a form of incentive, and then profit sharing can also be used, and this is specifically applicable to state-owned entities, where if a state-owned entity was able to produce a profit, often those in management or senior positions, part of their contract would then be a percentage of share within the profit that the state-owned enterprise has made. The following table just gives us examples of the types of bonuses or benefits and incentives that are found within South Africa, more specifically within the public sector. In terms of bonuses, there are fixed annual bonuses that are directly linked to performance, incentive and performance bonuses that are directly linked to the quality and the output of individual performance. Then we have allowances, like for instance, entertainment allowances, car allowances, abnormal working condition allowances. And then you also have other cash benefits such as overtime pay and leave payment. The non-cash benefits speak to things such as an organization sponsoring the transport and travel of their employees, or to provide subsidized transport, to give accommodation or house subsidies. Deferred benefits such as pension plans or provident funds, membership to group life cover and disability cover, accident insurance, the ability to accumulate your leave over a period of time and have it pay out once you retire, and others such as the organization paying for cellular phone contracts or data contracts as part of the overall compensation package. The system that is used in the South African public sector is called the Codes of Remuneration, or the CORS. And the Codes of Remuneration were determined through a bargaining and negotiated process between the public service as the employer and organized labor on behalf of the employees. Every 3 years, there would be negotiations regarding the basic salaries, the wages of employees, their annual service bonus, their 13th check, their contribution of government to the government employee pension fund, and other deferred contributions such as car allowances, contributions to medical schemes, housing allowances. Often leave is also a contested issue during these negotiations. But the South African Public Service, the Bargaining Council for the South African Public Service, is responsible for ensuring that this negotiation takes place between the employer, the South African Public Service then, and the employees. Separate bargaining councils exist for specific occupations such as teachers, and their salaries and their basic conditions of work are then negotiated between that sector bargaining council and the public service as employer. The regulations that apply to public servants, public officials in general, is that any person that is permanently employed by the public service has the right to pension benefits. And this is then the government employee retirement fund, and then the medical benefits as well. And they can, for instance, belong to the government employee medical scheme, GEMS. There is also housing benefits that employees are allowed to access, and it usually starts around a subsidy of 500 Rand once a person can provide proof that they actually own a property. There is also the service bonus that employees have access to depending on their years of service. And then there is a very specific leave dispensation. And the leave dispensation talks about the amount of days that an employee has and how many days can be carried over to the following financial year, and how many days can be accumulated over a period of time that can then be paid out as when they retire or earlier upon request. The leave dispensation also makes provision for temporary incapacity leave should there be a serious illness and an employee is for a period of 3-6 months not available or not able to work. Then there are conditions under which they will be granted special leave and still receive their remuneration. Maternity leave for mothers, there is a guarantee of 4 months for mothers, and there is also paternity leave that is available, adoption leave, a variety of different leaves, family responsibility leave that employees can access. The importance is that, especially for the leave dispensation system and not abusing it, is that paperwork needs to be submitted in support of the leave request. Overtime can also be paid, and if a person is asked to work on a Sunday or a public holiday, they will be paid twice their basic salary, and any other overtime over the normal 40-hour work week will then be 1.5 times their basic salary. Occupation-specific dispensation was created as a framework to retain, first of all, to attract, but also to retain especially scarce skills in the public sector. And with scarce skills, we mean persons that are highly qualified in specialized areas, such as in the medical profession, doctors and nurses, professional nurses specifically, engineers, for instance, or legally qualified persons such as attorneys. So it is a unique salary structure that has been created per occupation, and that makes these occupations comparable with what they would have earned in the private sector. So it is a means of trying to retain and to balance the compensation between the public and the private sector here. It's a centrally determined grading structure with broad job profiles, and it provides for adequate career pathing, then looking at where an incumbent, when they come into a specific position, where that incumbent can then move once they meet the requirements of a higher level. The occupation-specific dispensation is for all categories of nurses, educators, and legally qualified employees. This is just an example of the 3 types of specialized skills and how their compensation can differ based on their years of experience, and also based on how their package is then organized or created. So for instance, a senior assistant state attorney with 30 years experience could earn up to 551,000 Rand per year. And you can look at how they are trying to supplement the basic salary of educators, of nurses, of professional persons to try and attract and retain them from the public sector. The important aspect to remember in the management of compensation is that line managers, while they are guided by a centrally designed pay system, namely the codes of remuneration, there is some flexibility, and that line managers do have some delegation in deciding what the worth of their individual employees are, and that with motivation they are able to argue for a higher salary should they wish to retain a very specialized skill within their organization, or if a particular public servant is of great value to the organization. Then should they receive an offer from the private sector, that the line manager in the public sector organization does have some discretion in trying to match that financial offer. The public sector, however, has a variety of non-financial benefits and incentives that all employees have access to that make the public sector such an attractive employer. Thank you.